All right, Commissioners, we're going to go ahead and pick back up on our briefing today.
Good
Hello.
morning. Hello.
Good morning.
So this is a special briefing. You are going to be done by noon, right? That's the goal, or do you want before then?
That if we can be done by noon or 12:03, that would be lovely.
Okay. So I will try my best. I don't know about your fellow commissioners, but I will try. The really brief background, and I have a memo that's been provided to you. I will not review that. I won't provide a recap of our October 9th discussion in the interest of time, because I do believe you want to do more discussion on the VITA. But on July 24th, the City Commission approved an amendment to the zoning ordinance that will allow for 5 marijuana facilities types for growers, processors, provisioning centers, safety compliance facilities, and secure transporters. Separation distances were applied to these facilities to avoid oversaturation of any particular use in mixed-use commercial and industrial zone districts of the community. On September 18th, the City Commission enacted a moratorium to allow for additional time and discussion. We had a work session on October 9th where we covered a number of items that were brought to you by staff with a discussion guide. Those are included in the memo, and like I said, I won't rehash those in the interest of time. Today, we're bringing back to you several things. One is a proposed City Commission policy related to marijuana park waivers. That was a topic of discussion at our work session, in which the Parks and Rec Advisory Board decided to defer to the City Commission. You discussed it as a body and decided you were amenable to hearing these requests, and so we're laying out a process by which to do that. The second item you'll be hearing about is an administrative policy regarding marijuana application, the administrative process for that. Just wanted to provide that for your information only. This is not something that you would be adopting. The third item is a City Commission policy related to a marijuana industry voluntary equitable development agreement, or MyVita, as opposed to WIDA. We know you liked that one, but we thought MyVita might sound better.
More appropriate.
And time permitting, we know that you've received a lot of questions regarding recreational marijuana. We have prepared an FAQ, which was just handed out to you and will be put up on the website and made available to the public. The one in front of you is just the general questions and answers for the public. Okay?
Great,
So the first item is marijuana park waivers. And so we want to provide criteria by which the City Commission would use to decide whether or not to grant a waiver for marijuana locations located within the buffer area of a city-owned park. The ordinance reads that it'll be a 1,000-foot separation distance between a park and a marijuana facility, but the City Commission would have the option of waiving that distance. So we've provided you with a set of criteria by which you might want to look at that in your evaluation, so that you have some sort of standard to balance when you both hear public comment and then the input from the applicant. These are: 1, it's consistent with and will not materially impair the purpose and intent of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. 2, will not create an excessive burden on services currently furnished or may be required by the city or other public agency, including but not limited to park maintenance and operations. 3, will exhibit appropriate mitigation measures to reduce potentially adverse impacts. So if there's additional landscaping or screening or fencing or something else that would be needed, that could be provided. And 4, whether one or more of the following conditions exist, which will reduce potential detrimental impacts if the waiver is granted. So if there's exceptional topography, for example, if you're down in North Monroe and the park is up in Belknap, although you have parks along the river too, but I was thinking of exceptional topography. So if you have examples like that, or there's a railroad, or there's the river, or a freeway, you can take that into consideration, where you have some sort of environmental feature that is, or physical feature that is creating that separation distance that provides a physical, visual, or actual barrier to the facility from the park. And then the second part of that is the orientation of the sensitive use and or location of its primary entrance that increases the practical distance of the sensitive use from the proposed facility. So you may have examples where it's nearby, but you have maybe homes in between, or you have the entrance to the park is completely opposite on the other side of a block versus nearby or adjacent to the marijuana facilities. So those just provide you kind of some guidance on where you might locate or might think about when you're granting a park waiver. Do you have any questions on that?
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner O'Connor?
I still struggle with the idea that we continue to talk about the adverse impacts, and I mean, it's a pharmacy again, it's not, it's just, do we say that about, when we talk about other land uses for, gas stations where people could buy hot dogs that are on a roller cart all day, or, there's lots of negative things that exist at other things, and we're continuing to focus on one single business type as having these adverse impacts, and I just don't agree with the language of it.
All right. Commissioners, anyone else who wishes to be heard? I think one thing that we've heard is people want to make sure that they have an opportunity for public comment before a decision is made. I think that's really clear. Any other questions or comments? All right.
Okay.
Then we'll move on.
The second piece in your packet is a series of maps, and so I just wanted to just show this to you very quickly so that you know what to expect when you have these requests. We identified 19 parks that could potentially receive requests for waivers. We created buffers around those parks of 250, 500, 750, and 1,000 feet, so you have a sense of distance. We wanted to make sure in those metrics, especially given the comments about alcohol and 500-foot separations, that we were hitting that mark, so that would give you a sense of distance and for comparison purposes. So just so in the future when you see that in the discussions, you'll see a picture of the park, the location that's decided, a description of the park and the amenities that are potentially located there, so you know, if you're not familiar with the park, you know what's in it. So we provided these examples just for each ward so you can see it.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, the maps are helpful, Suzanne. I don't know if everyone had a chance to look at them electronically, but I found them really helpful.
The second one,
Commissioner Lanier looks like she has a question.
Look that confused. So I was trying to understand, Suzanne, so in particular, I'm looking at Kenosha Park.
Mm-hmm.
And unless it's the industrial, commercial area that is west of the park, I can't see what other locations, which I didn't think would be close enough to be impacted by what you have here, but, maybe that's just me not understanding the distance, because it's so residential right there. I wasn't sure exactly why that park in particular was on here.
it's just one of the 19, so we just wanted to provide an example of what a third ward park would look like when it came to you. So
If
it
you
is
wanted
the
a waiver.
industrial, so
So
it's
it's-
within a 1,000-foot radius.
Okay.
So the map that I just put up on the screen, you can see the purple are zoned industrial. So those could be potential marijuana locations.
Okay.
Where you might get a facility request, and Kenosha backs right up to that. Although not all of Kenosha and some of those areas are really accessible. Again, you have the natural barrier with the creek, and there might be other examples that you say, well, really, it's benign, it's not going to affect the park.
Even the 28th Street, that distance itself is included. Okay, that helps me to have proper context. Thank you.
That's why we thought the maps would be helpful, because it just helps.
Yeah.
Sometimes visualizing it is very
Yeah.
useful.
Thank you.
The second piece that you have in front of you is the marijuana application administrative process. It defines more clearly the draw of complete applications, the process that staff will be using to determine how the order of the Planning Commission agenda will be set. The planning director in this administrative policy, I have the authority to set the date, time, and other details as it pertains to the acceptance of applications and the random draw. Those will be sorted as directed by the commission with the voluntarily offered conditions in the MyVita. So that's why the MyVita piece that we're going to be reviewing is so important, because that helps me understand the points necessary to determine the random draw order. The policy also contains, we've listed in here the MyVita requirements, or they're not requirements, the voluntary offered document Those are going to be cited in this policy. We'll probably take them out just for simplification. In case you ever amend the city commission policy, we'll just reference that, but we wanted to include it for the purposes of illustration right now, just so you could see it all in its entirety. The planning commission agendas, we recognize that we are very busy still with development in the city. In fact, we've got about 8 or 9 applications that could be on the city or the planning commission's agenda for December. So we want to be sensitive to the rest of the development happening within the community. This will maintain 3 cases for non-marijuana applications per meeting. And then also, if we have waited longer than 90 days or more to hear a marijuana request, if we do not have other agenda items on the Planning Commission agenda, I reserve the right to be able to put more marijuana cases on the agenda. It's a great time to be appointed as a planning commissioner. I'm kidding. The fees piece.
I'm not going to ask even what you meant.
Get so many requests. Yes, it's so fun. The fees piece, we did discuss kind of, given that it's the application fee, which covers all of our, the staff time spent on this has been enormous. So the application fee helps recoup some of that, but then also kind of, are you serious when you're doing an application? And this is the amount that is allowed for in state law. What we wanted to do is provide a refund policy. So we do understand that there is processes that we have to take into consideration in reviewing all the applications for completeness. So there is work effort involved when we receive a submission. The extent of that work will depend on how far along in the process they go. So if we've gone up to the point of doing the draw, and an applicant goes through the draw and says, I blast on that cycle of the draw, and I want to withdraw my application and have a refund, this provides us with guidance on how much money they should have returned to them. In that draw piece, we also provided you with a series of maps. Just to give you an idea of how this will work, we had talked about during the work session having a potential other ordinance that kind of looks at the order of these and how we're going to grant approval for one and then suspend until we have approval for the next one when we're doing this ordering, so that we don't have conflicting areas that are approved at the same time. So once that separation distance kicks in, for example, in Area B, the Taylor Ann Street area, if we had 3 requests on the same planning commission agenda for that area, it could be very confusing about effective date and when that happens. So what we decided is we looked at these areas, we're calling them influence areas at the moment. You'll see a table that identifies the maximum number of facilities per area and the number of potential parcels that we could receive requests for, and developed a system when we look at how we're going to do that draw. What we will do is we will look at each area and then have the order representing each area. People still maintain their order in which they're drawn for that geography, that smaller geography within the city. In that way, we'll be able to stagger the approval so that we leave enough time for the approval and then any appeals timeline before the next one is heard. Does that make sense? So we've just went through and did that full analysis, so you can see first week of February, the yellow stars would be heard. Third week of February, we would hear the orange stars. So it just gives us a chance to be able to know kind of how many until we run out and how many meetings are we talking about. So we took that to its final conclusion with a final medical marijuana map. If we receive a request for all potential parcels and different arrangements, we could actually be looking for planning commissions through till August for marijuana requests. So it'll be busy, and that's with 2 meetings a month. Are there any questions on that? Okay. So finally.
No, well, I don't have a question, Suzanne, but I appreciate you thinking this through, because I think all of us have heard concerns about that very issue. Multiple applications in one area, and then having one approved and having that have a negative impact on others who have an interest in property. So I think this is a very thoughtful way to try to address that.
Thanks. We tried to, it still is going to create a problem potentially at the state level when if they don't make it through the state process, we'll still have given a land use approval to one of those parcels. And we've discussed that as staff as to to overcome it, and it kind of just is what it is. And once we've granted the land use approval to that site, unless they've abandoned it, and we do look at if they haven't maintained their licenses and they're not actively, doing that, we can take action to repeal a special land use approval. So we've talked about that as staff and included that actually in the ordinance amendments you'll be seeing on December 4th to take that into consideration. We do want to try to provide as many opportunities as possible, but we're also constrained legally about what we can do from a land use perspective and kind of the realities of trying to accommodate so many requests.
One concern I've heard also is if the approval at the local level occurs, but then not approved at the state could take 12 months or 18 months. Here you have this property sitting there that impacts other applicants in the area. But again, that's really outside of our realm of authority. That's really at the state level.
Yep. We've struggled with that because we really did want to try to find a way to do it and we think that we've come up with the fairest method possible to provide some consistency and uniformity to decision-making. Unfortunately, there's going to be some people who don't get their approvals and they're within that separation distance, but given the number of anticipated requests, you're going to have that no matter what. Okay. The final piece is the VEDA checklist. And this will be turned into a city commission policy for your adoption. We thought the checklist idea was probably the best way to both serve as staff. So this will be accompanying the policy for staff's use when we review and receive an application. Right now, there's currently, it says 14 on the cover sheet. There's actually 15 included in here. And we want to talk you through this, but I expect that there'll be some changes after this. And one of those in particular is related to energy, and Allison's going to comment on that when we get to that point. What we heard from the commission in your work session was that you were heavily focused on local, that you really wanted to focus on local ownership in so much as practicable. And we are limited by Proposal 2 as far as what we can and can't do in trying to get to that effect. We tiered both for residents of Grand Rapids as well as business owners, and that's one question that I'll be asking you is it residents or business owners or residents who are also business owners? Because that adds up to different points. So the concept is there's 15 items, you get a number of points. The ones with the highest points will be in the first draw for the Planning Commission agenda. So then it'll be
like what we talked about last time, there'd be a tier 1, and those would be the applicants that would be reviewed first.
correct. Yep. So the first piece is
I'm sorry, Susan.
That's okay.
Commissioner Linear has a question.
If you're going to go through it, then you may answer the question. I'm just more curious of when would you want our input? Do you want that today, or do you want us to weigh in at some later point? I don't know what the time,
Yeah.
how much time we have today, so.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll run through it. If we have a couple minutes for questions, we'll answer those. Your feedback would be most valuable, though, as soon as you can.
Okay.
Because it will be coming back to you, hopefully, for adoption on December 4th.
Okay,
You
that
can
helps.
also discuss it when it comes back to you as a formal policy on December 4th.
That helps, thank you.
Okay. So the first one is if an applicant who has resided for one of the last 5 years in the general target area as defined by HUD. So that's really the pre-World War II part of the city. That's where, as defined by HUD, that's where we have more disparities, and we have issues like housing condition and persons of low income. So we thought the GTA was a good metric to try to target that area, and so that would be 1 point. We mentioned one in the last 5 years because we know that there's concern about people who were forced out of a neighborhood. Maybe they lived in a neighborhood, but because of rising rents or some other condition, they had to move out of the city. And so we wanted to provide that window for them, which is why we say one out of the last 5 years. And the question for you is whether or not you think that window is too big, not enough years. I think that, your guidance on that would be greatly appreciated. The second one is if they're a resident of the city of Grand Rapids. The third is a Kent County resident. And fourth, it has state of Michigan residency. So each one, again, these are cumulative. So if you are in the GTA, then you'll get all 5 points or 4 points. And then as you move further out, your point number goes down. The same thing applies to businesses. If you have an established business within the GTA, the city, the county, and the state. And so that takes you through items 8. Number 9 is properties for which no waivers are required, so they're able to meet all of the separation distance requirements, and they don't have to go through the waiver process. They would receive a point for that. This one, number 10, I don't know how you feel about it, but we put it in there. If they've already obtained pre-qualification from the state, so that we know that they have a greater likelihood of success in obtaining their medical marijuana license. Number 11, energy efficiency, and I'll come back to that one in a second. Number 12, commitment to hire 10% employees who are City of Grand Rapids residents. Number 13, commitment to hire 30% employees who are Kent County residents. Number 14 is commitment to 20% micro LBE participation, and we left that intentionally broad so that they can interpret how they want to engage. And it depends really kind of on what part of a business you're talking about. If it's a grower and you're hiring people to do harvesting versus a retailer or provisioning center, what do those look like? So you might have different kinds of participation in that business. And the last one is accessibility. And so the two points on the ones, accessibility, the question is also whether or not you want to just meet ADA requirements, or if you would prefer that the requirement is for universal design, which is more stringent. And I'll have Allison comment on the energy piece.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, Commissioners and Mayor. Just wanted to share a little bit with you about energy. I'm learning a lot about the industry and how energy intensive it is. So I just wanted to share a couple of pieces of information with you. And then Landon's really been gracious enough to be working with me to provide a little bit of information that is an update from what is actually on your sheet today. But just to put into perspective, 4 indoor plants use as much electricity as 29 refrigerators. This is the most energy intensive industry that is out there. And I know that at the city, we have commitments to our 2030 district, as well as our Zero Cities project participation. So the key components that I just want to highlight there are we're really encouraging businesses to be as energy efficient as possible, and then to be looking to offset additional energy consumption with renewable energy. And so part of the Zero Cities project is trying to identify some city policies and programs that we can implement to help incentivize. So this fits very nicely. Now, we're still in the Zero Cities process. That's a 3-year process, but this is something along those lines. When I was just at a conference in Denver, they were talking about 4% of all of Denver's electricity comes from the marijuana industry. It is the highest electricity consuming industry throughout the city. I was told that Lansing's first grower plans to use $10 million worth of electricity per year. So I hope it's just painting a picture, and I'm learning a lot of this as we are now, so that's why we're working to kind of update some of the information. There are some concerns around water consumption as well, so I'm starting to try to work to collect some of that data and work with our water department as well, just in terms of capacity and the amount of water that's being used for these facilities. But the last part that I really want to emphasize that I recently learned about was that even in some cities, they have experienced some brownouts in the service area where industries have come on board, because to my understanding, there's nothing that requires a facility to notify a utility partner in advance of trying to come online. So you could get your application, move in, install all of your equipment, and go to turn everything on. And because a lot of the buildings that are being used are older buildings that perhaps don't have the infrastructure in place to support the energy that's going to be consumed by the facilities, it can trip a brownout. And so I think as a city, we're just trying to be mindful and provide a couple of suggestions for how we can work through this and ensure that it's being taken into consideration as we work through this application process. And so you do have a couple of items on your sheet. I do just want to comment that, as I said, I was working with Landon, and he did a fantastic job of putting some placeholders in here. A lot of the Energy Star certified items that are currently included in here don't actually apply because there is no Energy Star certification for the marijuana industry. It's very industry specific, and they have not developed one at this point in time. So a couple of the items, we brought together a small stakeholder group that came together very quickly that includes some utilities, some growers, our USGBC partner, and some others where we're trying to be thoughtful about what might be some of the best items to include, and we'll get you updated information, but a few that I just wanted to highlight that would replace some of those Energy Star items that are listed on your current copy would be encouraging those applicants to enroll in our 2030 district, which then requires them to submit information about actual energy use so we have a better understanding about what's happening around energy consumption and can be working with the industry. It's free. It's via Energy Star. It's a matter of putting in your monthly electricity and natural gas bills. Looking at submitting an energy greenhouse gas reduction plan to show that the industry is being thoughtful in their own facility about how they're going to be addressing the energy. Working with utility partners to provide that advance notice. As what I've learned very quickly is that if you can provide information about your estimated energy consumption, the utility partners will evaluate that and essentially can come back and say, yes, that works with your current facility, or no, some upgrades will need to be made to your facility in order to support the energy use that you need at that facility. And they have a process in place by which to work through that. But at least providing that information to a utility partner up front, I think is a method in which we might be able to work against the brownout situation. And then one other that we were talking about was committing to complete an energy audit within 12 months of having an industry up and running or a facility up and running. So those are some of the early items that we've identified. And I know that I talked to Landon as well about if any of these are even able to be made a requirement or not.
Thanks. All right. Suzanne, any final thoughts? And then I'm going to open up for questions or comments.
Nope.
No? Okay. Commissioner Kelly?
Since we just talked about this, I would like to ask Landon, is it possible that we make, for example, an energy audit, a commitment to that, and that they communicate with the power companies ahead of time? Can we make that a requirement, or can we give them points?
Well, we in fact discussed some ideas of, could we make certain points of the VITA a required point? So if you want to submit a VITA in general, maybe make a base energy efficiency or audit or plan a requirement of that VITA. We also talked about the accessibility, for example, being maybe a required point.
Right.
We could certainly do that, and then also have an increased energy efficiency point perhaps available for growers or for other facilities for a little bit above that baseline, and some perhaps water reclamation or solar panels or whatever it might be to help bring that down. But I think we could explore some options to make it required.
I think that the notice, for example, to Consumers Energy of the facility being located is an easy requirement that we could put into ordinance. I think some of the other ones where we wouldn't require it, the installation of solar, for example, that would be a more optional thing and would have to be included in the VITA. So we will be going through the list that Allison described and trying to sort out which ones we can actually put right into ordinance and which ones would be better left for incentives.
Okay, that will be very helpful. Thanks.
All right. Commissioner Lanier and then Commissioner O'Connor.
So just a quick question, this may be for Allison. Did you find any best practices? So we kind of know what the downside is, but were there any models that did this a little bit better on the energy side?
So there aren't any that I found yet. When I was actually at the conference, there was a panel of representatives from the greater Denver area, and I posed the question to them, and they didn't have necessarily any responses at this time. I think because the industry is so new, but it's definitely something that I'll make sure that we're doing our due diligence to check if there are any.
Are there any other industries that we could, utilize the equivalent of this type of energy that we could maybe look at some models and how they're reducing their energy consumption?
I think to your point, we could look at some other industries. The food processing industry is very energy intensive, but to put in perspective, the information I have seen has shown that the marijuana facilities are even 3-4 times the energy consumption of even these other industries. So while we could look at it, I think we're just in a completely new ballgame with
Okay.
these type of facilities.
Thank you.
Allison, one follow-up to that, in relation to the water usage, are there, and again, I'm learning lots about this industry, but are there concerns also about waste? So like I know for breweries, there's a certain type of waste with certain IBUs. Is that true also for this industry? Or is it mostly water consumption?
Both, it is, but yes, on the wastewater as well. Again, I hesitate to share too much because I haven't had the chance to validate it, but I've been told that essentially when you touch a plant and then you're watering the plants, that can release some of the chemicals and the components of the plants that could ultimately perhaps make their way into your wastewater treatment plant. I haven't had a chance, but I've put it on Mike's radar, Mike Lunn, to have a conversation with him. Some early information I've received is that we have a number of permits in place, more on the wastewater side, that I think will help address this, where permits can be required for these processing facilities before they can get approved, whereas that's not necessarily the case on the water or the energy side.
So potentially there may be a pre-treatment requirement similar to other manufacturers where they have to do some pre-treatment. But maybe that is something that you can talk to Mike about. It'd be nice for us to know.
Mike has researched it and has followed up. It's viewed as a heavy industry because of the
okay.
chemicals involved. So
there's
he's
a
already
surcharge
thinking
and-
about what
okay.
will be required. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, this just seems like a bureaucratic and administrative nightmare for both implementation and monitoring, and it seems like some of these categories are just ripe for abuse. And I mean, just starting right out at the top, like, it's really easy. I mean, I'm going to imagine that a majority of these enterprises are not single operator owners, that there's going to be a pool of people together, or an ownership group, or a corporation that exists. And so you say one of the 5, the applicant includes someone who's lived in the GTA for one of the last 5 years. I mean, I think it's real easy just to throw a token person onto your thing that's lived in the GTA for the last 5 years, give them a 0.5% stake in your corporation, and suddenly you get to move up the list. That also seems like, is that the best use of my community resources for my already overstretched planning department, to have to dive into someone's living records, tax records, all that, just to prove that a 0.5% owner of a corporation suddenly gets to hop in line? I just don't think that that's real fair. The idea that we're going to continue to monitor some of these after the fact seems, a commitment to hire 10% of employees. So we give you a land use approval, you say you're going to hire 10% of people. What is the ramification if you don't hire 10% of people? Then I can't pull your land use after the fact, can I? When we give you a conditional approval, but that conditional approval is based on the fact you're going to buy a building, you're going to close on a building, you're going to install your equipment, you're going to hire people. That could take 2 years, and now you have a land use approval that exists. This just seems burdensome and cumbersome for the process. I also just, as it comes to some of this building department, or this energy stuff, I mean, I assume we're almost exclusively talking about growing facilities. I'm going to assume that any growing facility that's going to exist is going to need some building department and approvals to be able to do their, when you start a brewery or distillery, you have to call consumers and get more power brought to your building because you have a pretty big load. I mean, I'm going to assume if these are as intensive, most of the facilities don't have the infrastructure required. So if they upgrade their electrical service, we're going to have a building department official. So we're making it more cumbersome and burdensome than it has to be to say that it's, again, a planning department or an energy department's authorization to do that. It seems really easy that if one of these is approved, we're going to know that they're going to probably have to pull a building permit to do something. And I just think this is, I don't agree with it at all.
All right, others who weigh in. Susan, did you have conversations about that when you were working on this with your team? I think particularly Commissioner O'Connor's first point, I think most of us have already heard about folks who've been approached by individuals who want to open a facility, who are eager to pay a church tens of thousands of dollars for a waiver, or you name it. So have you, how do you address Commissioner O'Connor's first point about, you could easily work around these by doing a number of things?
Well, I think one of the ideas that we had, and it's not in here, and I wasn't sure where the commission would fall on it, but for example, for the residents, we require that we receive the information. They have to at least submit, based on your last discussion. If you're waiving, getting rid of the pre-qual requirement, that the pre-qual paperwork that's sent to the state should reflect at least that that resident is part owner. And the question is, you could say majority owner of the business if you wanted to, more clearly define, not just a resident and you're having somebody buy off somebody for 0.5%. So you could say majority owner to be able to speak to the resident or business owner component in the business. The paperwork that we receive would reflect that. The other piece is kind of the enforcement piece of it. And we've had a lot of discussions about that and whether or not we wanted to do some sort of licensing on top of it, because licensing can be easier to revoke than the land use approval. But even with the land use approval, if that stood, this is part of their application. They're submitting affidavits, they're representing, and so if any part of their application is found to be false or they're not meeting the conditions of approval, which would be everything that you have submitted to us, that would be a violation of their land use approval. And then, as I mentioned before, how would we choose to revoke it? We already have things in the zoning ordinance. If they're not complying with the special land use approval and the conditions thereof, what steps do we take? And so we're providing more articulation on that with the ordinance amendments coming. But I think that was the idea, is that this is part of their application. It's part of their approval. The expectation's maintained. And if it's not, do they want to risk being revoked for their use approval?
Well, who's going to monitor that? Like, that's my question. Like, how is that going to get monitored? Like, who's going to go back and check the MLBE status? Who's going to go back and check that they have 30% of their people? Like, are you going to audit their books every year to make sure that their payroll reflects? And again, that seems ripe for abuse. I can have 40 employees and I can have 30 of them work 1 hour a year and they count as an employee. And I mean, I just feel like there's all kinds of ways that this can be abused. And how much local government resource are we going to spend monitoring this insanity?
No, that's a good point. I mean, we already do monitoring of MLBE with the current city policy, and we get a report on that every year. And I know that, again, everything can be improved, but I know that we do have processes in place for that. I'm going to open it up for other commissioners who have thoughts. I think Suzanne was trying to capture our desire to use a VITA similar to a community benefit agreement that other communities have looked at, to identify applicants that meet the highest standards and our priorities, to make sure that as we tier them, they're in tier 1. So that's the essence of this, and I think you heard loud and clear last time that the preference is for local preference and hiring local, and a number of the other elements that are included in here that came from our discussion last time and our input at our last gathering, which was 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
So I'll go Commissioner Leonard. Commissioner Jones, did you have a comment? Or, okay.
I just, I think that we're wise to I guess, move along in a way that allows us to tweak as we go, kind of like a process that allows us to, I guess, for a better term, learn as we go. I say that because I can appreciate my colleague, Commissioner O'Connor's position and the framing of it, as well as those in the community who frame it as medicine, and perhaps compare it to that of a pharmacy. And I can also appreciate the concerns that law enforcement has, as well as others in community, in terms of, the fact that it's going to be made readily available, in particular on not just on the medical side, but, obviously with the election on last week, on the recreational side. So I think that, again, we're going down a path in which we've never been before. So the idea of just kind of going full bore and doing so with, with a blindfold on, I don't know how wise that would be. And yet I know that there's nothing that we're going to do that's going to please everybody. So I think we need to be smart about how we, put things in place so that we can, make sure that we're not sitting in a position where we have, significant unintended consequences. I'd much rather be, careful, at least in the beginning. And again, as we learn, we can begin to open things up more. I just think it's just the wise thing to do.
Commissioners? Commissioner?
Yeah, so I wasn't expecting 15. It feels like if we have 15, the more tiers that you have, I can't imagine like a lottery system for 15 tiers, but it just feels like the more chances that we open ourselves up for lawsuits when we have all of these different tiers. So I was thinking that we'd get to a point where we'd kind of agree on 3 to 5 things that we want to see accomplished as a group. I love the idea of a baseline for ADA and a baseline for energy efficiency that we want everybody to get along with. But, I'll say again, like I said the other day, hiring local is the one that's important to me. Sure, commitment to LBE participation. I think that we wanted to waive pre-qualification so people could get in line. So that one I don't know if I get behind. Properties of which no waivers are required seems fine to give that person a little bit bump. And the more I think about this kind of ownership and residency thing, I think it's tricky. I think it's tricky and could be problematic as much as I want to see local folks get a chance at it. I would lean toward the ownership side rather than the residency side. And I also like Kent County, Michigan. If Kent County's if we're going to put Kent County outcomes in here, then they should be sharing some of the money with us. But I think we should just stick to Grand Rapids. I don't know putting Kent County or Michigan in there makes any difference for me as a way of getting those numbers down further. But
Kurt, you bring up a good point. So I think you're absolutely right. We talked a little bit about this last time, to have applications that don't need a waiver to be in Tier 1. I think that's really objective. The pre-qualification, it's interesting. I've heard from a number of folks about this. Suzanne, maybe you can add some insight into this. My understanding of maybe the pro of including this is that you have applicants that have already gone through the extensive state licensing process and are likely going to actually get the license or be able to open up a provisioning center, whatever they want to open up, or whatever they got their license for. And then you don't have a local approval that maybe is for an individual or an applicant that doesn't end up getting the pre-qualification from the state, but then holds up other potential applications.
Correct.
Is that
That's
is that the
correct.
logic? I mean,
Yeah.
And I heard about on the flip side, you want to eliminate barriers, but
Right.
the reality is this isn't a barrier we're creating. This is a state requirement for licensing in order to open a facility anywhere in the state, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I've heard both sides.
Based on the discussion, and the Planning Commission really struggled with this on Thursday. They were really on the fence because they reviewed the zoning ordinance amendments and had quite a bit of debate and kind of going, well, we don't know. They ended up on the side of saying, keep the prequal, because they were concerned about the failure, the fail pass rate. We cited 42%. There were different people at the public hearing that ranged anywhere from like 36 to over 50% fail rate, depending on how you're looking at the numbers from the state. So that was the concern, is whether or not a land uses approval is given to someone who can't use it. And then if the concern is getting medicine to people, that there's a longer delay.
Okay, I'll go Commissioner Lanier and then Commissioner O'Connor, and then I'll see if Commissioner Kelly, I think I saw your hand up.
So another factor with the one we were just talking about, number 10,
Oh.
is there are a number of people who may not necessarily study this as closely as others. And so when it became apparent, when we started having the conversation publicly, they would not have been already going down the path of getting a license through the state of Michigan. And so, when it then became apparent that this would be a policy that the city of Grand Rapids would pass, then people started becoming more interested. And so there's this, the industry and those who are a little bit more closely studying it there's an advantage of those who are doing that in advance of us publicly talking about it. And that was the bigger, for me, bigger concern with just having the pre-qual as an approval, because then you're disadvantaging those who may not have been already aware. But to some of the other points, I know that I specifically have talked a lot about the local piece and trying to find a way to allow this to be, as much as possible, with those who are opening up any license in this city to be more, as localized as possible, as legally possible. So I am in favor of 1 through 4, because although I see them on the list as 4 different items, my driver's license can allow those to be checked that fast. There isn't a whole lot that would go into determining, each of these 4 steps. So although it may look like it's quite a few steps, all you have to do is just look at the address of the person who is applying. But to the point of number 1, I think I asked this question last time. What's the sweet spot of ownership that makes this, the best step as we're trying to determine local preference for owners? And so, and I don't know if that percentage is 50% and above, or, if it's 25. What I do know is that 0.1 isn't it.
Right.
Or 1% isn't it. So there has to be a significant enough of ownership that makes that meaningful, so that you're not driving past someone and, making a deal really quickly and adding them to your business plan, and they not have a stake in this. So I think it was really important for me that applicants, there would be a significant size of ownership. And maybe that's 15, maybe that's 25, I don't know. And I would welcome your input on that, but I do think it is important to include that in this section. And then some of the others, I think I'll just write my notes and share with you then, Suzanne,
Okay.
later, because I think this is a really good start, and I really appreciate all of you who have worked on this, taking this seriously and trying to find as many options as possible to try and address the concerns, or trying to address what we're trying to accomplish here locally, that infiltrating the city of Grand Rapids with national companies was not our preference. And so we are trying to have a more localized ownership pool as we're starting in this industry. And so thank you for the work on this, and I look forward to providing more feedback.
Well, and thank you for that, Commissioner, and others too. If you have additional feedback for Suzanne, if you can get that to her even beyond our time together today. I'm going to go to O'Connor, to Commissioner Kelly, but then just real quickly, I want to reiterate, it's not that every applicant has to do a VITA. This is a voluntary agreement.
Right.
And as we try to figure out how do you queue up applicants, you create a tier, and there's examples in other communities where there wasn't a lot of thought in how those applications are being reviewed, and it became problematic. And so, again, this is an opportunity, again, not that every applicant has to have a VITA, but this is an opportunity to show how are you going to work with community and have a community benefit.
Well, and I think it's also important to note that it doesn't mean that they're automatically approved. And the Planning Commission has their hearing, and they might hear from neighbors, there might be a location. Just because they're heard by the Planning Commission doesn't mean that that's the ideal location that suits the neighborhood. So there's going to be, there's standards that the Planning Commission has to apply in their decision-making as well.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. So Commissioner O'Connor, then Commissioner Kelly.
I mean, I'm not trying to be sarcastic here, but it's not voluntary. If you want to get in, you got 40 properties in Grand Rapids to get a chance at. I guarantee every one of the 40 properties that is done by right now, they're all tied up. So if you really want to be in this business, it's not voluntary. You have to go through this process, or you have zero chance of actually getting a license, because as Suzanne's map showed us, these meetings are kicked out for 11 months now. So it's not really voluntary. We're saying it's voluntary, but it's not voluntary. I hate this. I hate this. But if you want to get this to success, I think Kurt makes a great point. There's too much crap. There's too much stuff in here that you have to go through, right? So get rid of 1 through 8 and make it 2 points, right? You are a resident of the city of Grand Rapids, yes or no, and you own X percentage of the business or more. Done. Like, that is it. Like, don't make 15 tiers of stuff. Do the same for business. You own a business, like, we're picking winners and losers at a local level here. We're saying, oh, we just want local people in. We're still picking winners and losers at the local level, right? We're saying, I don't want anybody from Alaska or Oregon to be here, but, we're going to give you a little bit of preference if you're from someplace in Michigan. Like, that, we're still picking winners and losers. So if you want to do this, it's yes or no. And these are things that are easily quantifiable. You're going to have an incorporation document. You're going to have to provide an incorporation document that says X percentage of owners, whether it's in a single entity, single person, or an accumulation of, if you have 5 partners and 3 partners own X percent and they all live in the city of Grand Rapids, you're done. Like, make it simple. Like, we're making this way too complicated. And I'm only trying to do this because I know I have zero chance of making this thing go away. So let's figure out how to make it more palatable.
This is how you make the sausage. This is
I know,
the
but it's-
importance of this work.
But we're
is to
making
work through
sausage
this
right now,
process.
Rosalind.
I think you make a very good point.
Okay, and I'll give you the rest of my suggestions.
Okay.
That I want this done. I'm sick of talking about this stuff. Number 9, no waivers. That's perfectly fine. Make that it's a yes or no question. It's easily monitored. Number 10, same deal. It's yes or no. If you decide you want to go through the process, you get a bonus point. If not, you're done. Energy efficiency, we can live with that. Like, just create some simple standards. Like, again, I appreciate where you're coming from on some of this stuff, Allison, but do I really care about TVs? No. Like, we're worried about, what are we really trying to move the needle on? Growing facilities. Pick the few things that matter in the facilities that matter and make them quantifiable, okay? Number 12, I really, as much as I think, I get everyone's desire to want to make number 12 real, it's a monitoring nightmare. Like, that's something that we don't need. We don't have to spend planning department resources on the back end dealing with. 13's easy. 13, again, it's from Kent County. Do I care? No, get rid of it. I don't. To Kurt's point, like, if we're hiring if we're worried about the city of Grand Rapids, if we're gonna make a determination between us and them, and we're only caring about Grand Rapids, care about Grand Rapids. Don't care about, do the right thing.
Point taken.
14 is fine, 15 is fine, okay? But 13's hard to monitor, and 12 is hard to monitor.
What did you say on 10?
10 is fine. If somebody wants to go through the process and they want to be approved by the state, that's
It's
their.
1 point.
That's 1 point,
Right.
that's their decision. If they want to come without having been through the thing because they have other points to go through their voluntary mandatory development agreement, then
So
It's up to them.
a couple of thoughts. I think I'll weigh in on a few of those items. So I am perfectly supportive of just going with Grand Rapids. I think that captures our conversation from last time, really being concerned about individuals who live in our city having access to opportunity. So I'm fine with striking Kent County and Michigan and sticking with the city. In regards to the energy efficiency, and Allison, I appreciate you bringing this up. From folks that I have talked to, and then I've talked to a number of other mayors as well, my understanding is it's just good business sense because this is such a high energy usage type of industry that many of the facilities, they're already doing what they can to reduce their energy usage. Is that not something you've heard? That's, I think of like Switch and the data center. Data centers all over are looking at how do they reduce their footprint and incorporate significant renewable energy and energy efficiency into their work. It seems like it makes good business sense to do that as well.
I think you're right. The feedback that I got, it was from one of our stakeholder participants in the group we pulled together, was that it's very capital intensive upfront to do some of these increases to make the facilities more energy efficient. And their feedback was that they felt that a lot of applicants would do the bare minimum and not be that energy efficient in the beginning until perhaps there are enough years of operation where they've built up the capital needed to then implement and do things like LED lighting or high-efficiency humidification. So that's just the feedback that I received. They indicated that they were implementing these on voluntarily because they felt that it was a marketing differentiator for them.
And would this industry not be eligible to be a part of the PACE program?
So that was a question I just reached out to and asked our facilitator or our manager, Lean and Green Michigan, to determine that. So PACE does apply to industry. I think there's an issue around whether the investors are comfortable. And so that's the question that has been posed that they are getting feedback to me on. Banking industry, no, but the banking industry is not who has participated in PACE. So,
I mean, it just seems to me like we want to come alongside any industry and help them be more energy efficient and incorporate universal design, that we should be helping with that. So if PACE is available, I think that's good for
Yes.
this industry to know
and I have
that
connected
that's a
some
tool.
of the stakeholders so far to our PACE administrator.
Okay. Commissioner Jones?
Just want to push back real quick on the discussion around residency. I think that it would be in our best interest to be inclusive of the county, simply because of what I would refer to as the urbanization of Kent County. And so just to stick with the city, I think might be somewhat short-sighted based on the fact that there are more folks who probably have the means to engage in ownership, who happen to be of a different hue, who live in the outlying areas of the city. So I would advocate for it to be a county residency as well as city.
So
City.
would you support taking out 1 and 4, the GTA and the state of Michigan? And just having 2 and 3, City of Grand Rapids and Kent County?
I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So just of note, the GTA is the area where you're most likely to, I mean, if you think of the demographics of the city, we were thinking the GTA was more likely, if you're talking about equity outcomes, that's where it would be affected.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We really didn't get rid of anything.
Maybe the state of Michigan, Commissioner. All right, others to weigh in on this. I'm trying to find some consensus of the body to give a little bit more direction to Suzanne. Commissioner Kelly, you have comments on this?
Yeah, my first question when I was reading this was, how do we know what the cost is? Who's going to do the enforcement, and how would they do it? So enforcement costs are, I think, important for us to better understand. I agree we need to simplify this. There's too many steps. But we also have some priorities here, and it's no wonder we have 15 or 7 of us. We've probably each gave 2 of them. So thank you
Yeah.
for trying to
Yeah.
address all of these concerns you're hearing. I do think the MLB program is fairly different because normally we are contracting, these are contracts with the city. We don't find out what they're doing in the private sector, which I wish we could, so maybe this is a way to begin to do that, but curious
That
about
may be
that too. So I just need more information on MLBE and how that might work, and then the costs of enforcement. But yeah, I think we need to simplify this.
Yeah, so our city manager is reminding me that we're running late again. And so did you have a couple comments? I think the question of enforcement is a difficult one. And we've wrestled with that because we don't really know the full cost, not just for the planning department, but for code enforcement and for our police department. And I think that is a challenge. So we may not have good numbers on that at the outset. But City Manager, do you want to make a couple comments and recommendations, and then maybe we need a little more time on this and a little more detail on some of these before we make a decision?
Yeah, absolutely.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for your feedback. This is very helpful feedback. I think as I listened to the discussion, one of the challenges was we were trying to structure this as any other development agreement or incentive. And the reality, I think I heard the comment earlier, is that beyond just the application, we have no long-term way to claw back, incentivize, or penalize anyone for compliance. In some of the other areas, like we would on other development agreements, like employment goals, et cetera, there are no incentives to it. So I think the feedback is helpful. I'm hearing simplicity and reducing some of requirements that we would have on enforcement, I think I would support that. If Suzanne can remind me of the timeline again when we propose to come back for the discussion for the commission's consideration.
So this will come back December 4, and we can discuss it more. What we can do is take another shot at it and put it up for discussion on December 4th if you want.
Actually, can I propose something different? Can I ask my colleagues to get you feedback this week or ask for additional information on any of the items that you feel like you need to know more, whether it's MLBE or how would you enforce 10% hiring? If you all can provide Suzanne with those questions or comments this week, can we put it back on our agenda for maybe a 30-minute conversation at our meeting on November 27th? So we can maybe give you some verbal direction before it comes back in December.
Sure.
That will give us time, I mean, all of us, I just read this
Yeah.
last night, so it'll give all of us some time to maybe process it a little bit more and have a conversation and get more information. Does that sound good, commissioners? Okay.
That's totally
Yeah.
fine, and that's exactly what this was for. It was for discussion, and so just the more feedback you gave us,
Great.
we move merrily along. So I do want to recognize staff's efforts with Kristen and Allison and Landon and Kristen, and everybody's been great working as a team.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for all of your work. And then Suzanne, thank you for, and I think a team actually worked on this. I know many of us have gotten emails already about recreational marijuana. This specifically is for medical marijuana. The state still has a year to move forward. So that Q&A is really helpful. If you get additional questions you're hearing from the community that are not included in the Q&A, please send those to Suzanne or to our city attorney so that we can get good information out in the community so that they know what it means for them.
Quickly, just as you bring up recreational marijuana, 66.77% of Grand Rapidians voted in support of it.
Yes, that's great because they also supported decriminalization and people shouldn't go to jail for it. So that's a good thing.
That was only 62%, though.
Thank you, Commissioner. We all saw the results, and many of us voted, so hopefully most of us, all of us. So anyway, if you get questions from the community or from neighborhoods, they're not included on the FAQ. Let's get that out into the public as quickly as possible so that people know.
And we are anticipating that in the future we'll have a discussion about recreational marijuana and the regulation of that, similarly to what we've done with medical marijuana with the commission. So we'll rely on you to tell us when you would like to have that conversation.
Let's try to get this under our belt first.
Let's do that first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, commissioners, with that, we are adjourned. Those of you joining me for Economic Development Project Team, please meet me downstairs in 601.